Action strategy. It's a genre that, I'll admit, I've been particularly dismissive of in the past. My previous experiences have shown me that when a developer labels their game as action strategy, it generally means one thing: it's not a strategy game. Well, Tooth and Tail taught me that action RTS can actually be a thing, and it turns out that action strategy just might be a thing too. Hi, I'm Calivan, and today we're going to take a look at HighFleet, a game that combines action and strategy in equal measure. The blending of genres is somewhat akin to alchemy. Some concoctions naturally work well together and generally produce decent outcomes. This is why there are so many action puzzle games, as those two genres are particularly well suited. They might contain some action-only or puzzle-only segments, but often you'll be using the action environment to solve the puzzle. You need both sets of skills to progress, and in the better games, the possibilities of the action environment actually dictate the likely resolutions to the puzzles themselves. This is something the Portal games excel at, and is one of the many factors that make them outstanding examples of the genre. But like oil and water, some things just don't mix. That doesn't mean that you can't combine them, but it does mean that you need to be particularly clever about how you do it. In our action strategy case, what you often end up with is an action game with a few strategy bits tacked on. Mostly busy work with few real choices. The question I normally ask myself is, if I took the parts of either one of these genres away, would you still have a game left? The remains wouldn't have to be a particularly deep or amazing game on their own, but would there be enough left to still qualify as a commercial product? Sometimes these combinations can work. Natural selection is both an FPS and an RTS. One player on the team takes the role of the commander and has a top-down RTS interface. The others use their FPS skills to engage the enemy. You're not doing both at the same time, but the genres are properly intertwined. The commander is the one who can see the big picture. The players actually execute those orders, secure resources, and take the fight to the enemy. They need each other, and their fates are directly linked. But that's a team-based multiplayer game, and HighFleet isn't any of those things. So what is it? Well, honestly, that's a bit hard to describe. Most of the time you'll be looking at a map, moving your fleet from place to place, looking for supplies and allies, and avoiding powerful enemies. You'll be planning your next moves, gathering intel, watching the radar, and decrypting radio intercepts. You'll also be dispatching strike groups to tackle the enemy garrisons so you can land at a town to repair and refuel. This is all very strategic stuff, and exactly the sort of thing you would expect to find in a strategy game. However, when a fight actually kicks off, that's when the action starts. Instead of some automatic resolution based on fleet strength, upgrades, and a bit of a dice roll, you'll be placed in direct command of your ships. You steer them around the skies, shoot away with their cannons, and fire their missiles and active protection systems. At a first glance, it looks like a very high-resolution version of an arcade game from decades ago, but there's a massive amount of depth in how damage is allocated. That means positioning and accuracy is of great importance. It's all wrapped up in a feudal story. Your character is not only a duke, but the son of the emperor. You've been dispatched to the once conquered land of Gerat, a fictional desert on a fictional world. There's been an uprising and a group of nobles have banded together to overthrow the king, a puppet who was placed on the throne at the behest of your empire. Gerat has declared itself a republic, and that just won't do. So your job is to conduct a bit of colonial policing and restore order. However, things are not that simple. During the opening of the expedition, it's revealed that your empire's capital has just been attacked. The emperor is dead, and you're now operating far from home and without support. It's also obvious from the early stages of the game that this new republic is hardly a paradise of smiles and prosperity. Many of the people are not happy with the new leadership, and there's plenty of supporters and potential allies out there. It's decided that the only real course of action is to press on with your crusade. The future is uncertain, but taking the fight to the enemy and reclaiming Gerat is the best idea you and your officers can come up with, so that's what you set out to do. The end goal is to reach the capital of Kiva. This is some distance from your initial deployment, way more than you can do on a single tank of gas. So you and your fleet must progress in a northerly direction, stopping off at the various other towns on the way to refuel. However, there's two key problems. Firstly, fuel costs money and you don't have much. Secondly, there is a lot of enemy ships out there and they will try and kill you whenever they get the chance. Each settlement is guarded by a small garrison force that must be overcome. And on top of this, there are a number of enemy strike groups and smaller flotillas roaming around the map. If they get a whiff of your location, they'll come and find you, wear you down with tactical missile attacks and airstrikes, and then finish you off in close combat. Given the right set of circumstances, the enemy mobile forces are certainly beatable, but if you're not careful, you'll die a slow attritional death. In a big all-out slugging match, you'll take a lot of damage, and it takes a great deal of time to repair heavily damaged ships. You can only conduct repairs in a settlement, but if you remain in one of these locations for too long, one of the residents will tip off the enemy and they'll come looking for you. You'll also start to run low on rare components. The basics you can buy almost anywhere, but the really important stuff, like the air-to-air counter missiles that destroy the big incoming strategic stuff, can only be found in certain specialist shipyards. Finally, you'll need to find a way to pay for all of this fuel, equipment and repair work. Some of this will be funded by the selling of salvage, but to earn some big cash you'll also need to find and intercept some of the enemy transport fleets. All of these considerations come together to form a big vicious logistical circle. You have to keep on the move to avoid too much combat, but you need some combat to gather funds for fuel, repairs and rearmament, not to mention unlocking safe passage towards the capital. It's a careful balancing act that involves juggling all of the requirements and constantly making risk versus reward based decisions. But you're not totally on your own out there, and there are plenty of tools available to help you push the balance in your favour. For one thing, your ships can have a blistering amount of electronics. The most obvious is radar, something that gives you an idea what's in your immediate vicinity, although it is a bit of a double-edged sword. Some of the more powerful enemy fleets have the ability to track radar emissions and fire anti-radiation missiles that can home in on radar sources. You can see them, but that means they can see you. It's a similar case with jamming. If you do decide to turn on your radar jammer, then they can't use radar-guided weapons anymore, but they can tell there is a very strong jamming signal out there and then come home in on that. You do also have passive detection, which is particularly handy when you're too paranoid to turn your radar on. This is a lot shorter range, but it does give you an indication of the position of nearby enemy ships. But as with all forms of electronic warfare in HighFleet, some of the enemies have the same capabilities that you have. And as such, if you can find them with your passive detection, then they can do the same to you. Well, sort of. The detection characteristics of both radar and IR is based on the properties of your ships. Small ships with few engines have a low radar and heat signature, so they're harder to detect. Large ships are very powerful, but their size and massive engine power makes them light up like a Christmas tree. Again, this adds even more things for you to consider. Small ships don't have much room for armour or firepower, but they're very fuel efficient, fast and have low electronic signatures. Large ships can pack an almighty weight of firepower and have very thick hides, but they're also slow, require massive amounts of fuel and are very hard to hide. There is one more electronic system, and it's something that your enemies don't have access to, and that's signal intercepts. The various transport and strike fleets constantly send messages to each other. Sometimes these are requests, like I need fuel or medical supplies, sometimes they're contact reports, and sometimes they're just status updates. You can intercept these signals, decode them, and then use that information to plan your next moves. You get a message with a sender and a recipient code name, a bearing, and also the content. You can pretty much guess what sort of fleet is sending by the type of message it sends, and the content will often contain route or location information. Sometimes this is really useful, other times not so much. It's an odd little system, but what makes it interesting enough to mention is that you get out what you put in. You can totally ignore it, as the benefits it provides are certainly not essential. Or you can get really involved, draw pins and notes on the map and build up logs of activity. You can use the rule to measure distances and approximate locations based on reported speeds. It really depends what sort of gamer you are. If you enjoy that level of over-complexity, then it can be rewarding when the manual work yields results. But if you find it frustrating, you can just totally ignore it and forge a different path. Some of the settlements along the way contain potential allies, and if you're convincing enough, will join your cause, bringing not only themselves but also their ship and other benefits to your fleet. It's a really interesting dialogue system, and rather than choose exact lines, you play a card that represents a certain topic and your feelings on it. Depending on how they respond to this card, their appraisal of you will move towards a positive or a negative light. You've got 6 turns to make your case, and if all ends well, they'll decide to join you. You have to make assumptions about their character based on the circumstances of your meeting and their appearance, and then choose a few arguments that appeal to the traits you think they're most likely going to have. It's a bit confusing the first few times you do it, but after a while you get the hang of it and mostly get the outcome you want, especially by greasing the wheels with the odd gift. These characters help to tell the story, and although the game doesn't go into a huge amount of detail when it comes to world building, it still manages to create a universe that has some depth. Rather than bog you down with pages and pages of lore, it instead sets the scene using visuals and music, and then with a few choice bits and pieces it draws parallels with our own history and other well-known works of fiction. There are themes we easily understand, like religion, prophecy, feudalism, empire building, colonial expansion, war, conquest and so on. The use of dieselpunk-esque machines with cannons and nukes rather than warp drives and lasers gives it an air of believability, and the echoes of Middle Eastern or North African conflicts make it feel like something other than high fantasy. The combat system itself has a great deal of variety. There might only be half a dozen weapons and a few different engines and other module options, but the ways in which they can be combined are almost limitless. Ships are nothing but a collection of components and hull pieces. There are plenty of pre-made options, but you can customize them all in-game. More than that, you can design your own ships from the ground up, piece by piece, until they are as flexible and powerful as you want them to be. But there's a lot of considerations with this shipbuilding, and you've got not one, but two triangles to worry about. The first is the traditional firepower, protection and mobility trade-off that anyone who has any interest in armoured vehicles or ships, factual or fictional, will immediately recognise. You can have a decent amount of speed and firepower, but don't expect much in the way of armour. You want big guns and a thick skin, that's all very achievable, but your speed will at best be described as glacial. This is all fine and dandy, but at the strategic level there's a whole second set of trade-offs. Instead of guns, armour and speed, you're looking at power, availability and cost. Build a really big ship with lots of guns and many layers of armour, and that works great in a fight, but what about between the fights? It's going to be a nightmare to keep up with those fuel and repair requirements, especially if it needs a lot of consumables that aren't always available for purchase. You can make ships that are easy to maintain and cheap to run, but they won't pack much of a punch. How you go about all of this comes down to your playstyle and personal choices. If you like to pay attention to all of your radar scans, signal decrypts and use dedicated scouts, you can avoid much of the harder fighting. And then when you have to fight, then fast, nimble ships can dodge most of the return fire. However, this does leave you vulnerable if you do get caught out. The other option is to build big, thick and slow. You'll have to spend a lot more time worrying about logistics, but when you are in a battle you can just smash your way through the enemy while absorbing everything they can throw at you. But this carries its own risks. Lots of damage means lots of repairs, and you may get caught out and have to fight just at the wrong time. The best way forward is probably a mix of both, using light and fast when light and fast will do, and keep your heavies back and out of the way until they're really needed. I've completed a few playthroughs and I find that my particular approach changes every time I do one, mostly because my understanding increases and I get more of a feel for what's really needed. The ship designer is very comprehensive and I've spent untold hours in there, fiddling around with the modules, trying to find the perfect designs for my own way of doing things. I'll admit they're not very pretty, but instead mostly end up as big armoured rectangles covered with huge guns. More of a sledgehammer than a scalpel, and I have to spend a lot of time thinking about logistics, but that's not a problem for me as I love that sort of thing. The action combat is pretty fun. You use one ship at a time while your enemy uses 3, unless they're pretty large then it's just 2. At any point you can move to the retreat marker and the next ship in your fleet enters the field. When you destroy an enemy ship, then a new one arrives to take its place, with combat completing when all of your opponent's ships are destroyed or you've retreated or lost all of your own. It's a simple mouse aim system where you choose a direction and click, but there are physics involved, so you do have to worry about trajectories and projectile speed and all of that. The arena itself is a 2D system, so you've just got to worry about up, down, left and right. You look at the cross-section of the enemy ship in the bottom right of the screen, identify their weak spots and try and shoot them until everything goes big boom. Skillful ship handling is important. It's not just about shooting your enemy in the right spot, but also making sure you protect your own weak areas. It helps to try and position yourself so that one enemy ship is blocking the lines of fire of the other enemy ships. It's a bit tricky at first, but with practice you find you can get a good deal of hits, dodge much of the incoming fire, and convince the heat-seeking missiles of one ship to slam into the hull of another. It's fast, fun, and not too punishing. Your fleet's got a morale value. It's modified based on story events, but also rest and recuperation. When you start a fight, you lose a point of morale. On regular difficulty, you can opt to restart or retry an engagement by paying an additional point. As long as you use this mechanic sparingly, you can afford a few resets on particularly difficult fights, which prevents silly mistakes or plain old bad luck from spoiling an otherwise successful playthrough. And this is important because the whole game has a semi-Iron Man feel to it. You've got 3 campaign slots and it auto-saves on exit, but you can only save other checkpoints when landing at a few fleet headquarter towns. This makes your decisions and actions really matter, but the additional checkpoint saves do make it slightly more forgiving. I think this changes with difficulty, so easy mode lets you save more frequently and hard mode probably not at all. I'm not quite sure on the mechanics of this as I've only ever played it on normal. HighFleet works so well as an action strategy game because both sides of the coin are excellent fun and deeply intertwined. If you took away the strategy side, you'd still have a fun action game, and if you took away the action, you'd still have a challenging strategy game. They would be a bit lightweight on their own, but the combination of them together is a really solid experience. How you approach the strategy layer has a massive effect on the types of engagements you fight, what you fight them with, and how you fight them. Your performance in the action sections dictate your next moves on the strategy layer. The damage you take and the damage you do to your enemy seriously changes your immediate objectives and options. Kill an enemy strike group and that takes a lot of pressure off the immediate area, giving you more time to find fuel, supplies and allies. Narrowly avoid destruction in a very close fight? Well, then you'll probably need a lot of repairs, so you'll have to cancel your intended expedition and then instead reroute to the nearest repair town to get everything patched up. It's not an example of 2 mostly unrelated systems bolted together to create a genre-spanning game, nor is it simply a case of one genre with parts of another crudely tacked on as an afterthought. It's a proper action strategy crossover, and a pretty solid one at that, perfect for people who enjoy both of these types of experiences in equal measure. There are some things that HighFleet does particularly well, and there's also some other areas where it stumbles. The overall presentation is excellent. It looks and it feels amazing, and the combat aesthetics are simply perfection. The rain pours down in sheets, lightning arcs from the clouds, and tracer fire crisscrosses through the sky. The booms and the bangs are satisfying, as are the detonations, explosions, and huge jets of fire that sprout from the engines as you ram on the afterburners. Outside of the action, each system is like a little mini-game with its own quirks and benefits, but none of it feels like busy work, and instead everything serves a purpose. Landing your ship at a town provides a boost to repair speed, and the quality and precision of your landing increases the speed further. The various landing pads all have cumulative bonuses, and if you can fit in a tight gap or span several unlevel pads, then the bonuses will be significant indeed. Again, HighFleet excels here in the interconnectivity of its systems. The size and the shape of your ship and the design of its landing gear all dictate your options. You can save weight and cost with a minimal setup, but going all out in the leg department can ensure that you always get faster repairs. I think the best way to describe much of the game's interface is with the word tactile. There's a lot of feedback between input and result. Sometimes this is about audio and visual cues, but in other areas there have been some really smart choices. Take the electronic warfare and radio interfaces. It all looks very analog with buttons and dials. Moving these dials around is done with a mouse wheel, which matches up the control you see in the game with the physical control in your hand. It actually gives you the feeling of dialing in the frequency. It's only a really small thing, but it's one of many that manages to create a really authentic feeling. One of the biggest problems the game suffers from is a lack of explanation. The tutorial teaches you a few systems but doesn't really give you any clues about how to actually play the game. It goes into a lot of detail about how radar works and then forgets to inform you that it's probably best to keep it switched off most of the time. The manual does provide a lot more information, but who reads a manual these days? Probably not many people. If you're the inquisitive sort, then none of this will be too much of a problem and you'll actually enjoy the learning and experimentation and find this lot of satisfaction when you start to understand it. But if you just want to get stuck in, which is completely normal and understandable for any game, then it can be really frustrating. You'll quickly realise that you're doing something wrong but struggle to find out exactly what that thing is. It's also an indie game from a very small team, and as such there's a few bugs or systems that just don't work out in practice how they are described on paper. Crew percentages and turret positioning seems to have no real effect on the performance of your ships, even though the in-game systems have plenty of indicators that would suggest they do. From what I understand, the game received a reasonable amount of patches in the immediate months following its launch, many of which tried to improve systems or fix the balance. As you can imagine, any system with this much flexibility is prone to a lot of min-maxing, much of which made the challenges in the original release trivial. Unfortunately, this has left a lot of the community-made guides significantly out of date and of little use, full of recommended ship designs that simply don't work in the current version. It's produced by a Russian studio and updates stopped in 2022. I don't think there's an official reason for the radio silence, but I'm sure we could all make a pretty good guess. That said, it is a complete game. Despite the problems, it works very well, and I think the lack of guidance the game provides is a far bigger problem than any of its incomplete systems or bugs. HighFleet really feels like a game from decades past. Not in terms of graphics or presentation, those are all top-notch and way above and beyond what I expect from an indie title, but more from a complexity and immersion angle. A lot of games from the early 90s were incredibly detailed but had very little tutorial information, and their manuals barely covered the basics. Figuring out how each of the game's systems worked and how they fit together and how to make the most out of them was part of the experience itself. Games like this weren't about providing lessons and then guiding you through each challenge until you reached the finish line. They were more about encouraging discovery and experimentation. This sort of philosophy wasn't always a good thing, and it did lead to a lot of terrible games or others that were just almost impossible to break into. But very occasionally it did result in something a bit special. And I think HighFleet is something a bit special. It's a great idea, skillfully crafted by a developer who isn't afraid to add optional systems that can be ignored or enjoyed at your leisure. I'll give you one example. The radio intercepts are often encoded. This is in the form of a letter replacement system that alternates in batches of 4 characters, consisting of 4 code wheels with 36 combinations on each. When you destroy an enemy ship, sometimes you get to salvage the contents of the radio room, which contains a burnt bit of paper with one of these 4 codes on it. You'll need 4 of these to decipher that week's messages. Or do you? You see, this is actually a pretty simple cipher, and although it presents something approaching 2 million combinations, you can solve it with a language-based attack. It's not simply a yes-no system where the game checks if you have 4 fragments and then shows you the message. Instead, it's an actual code, and if you guess the 4 values, then you could just go ahead and read it. And you can guess them, not by spinning the wheels randomly for days, but instead by using what you know about the sorts of messages the enemy sends and then your understanding of language. In this example, the degree sign shows me that the second and third sets of characters must be coordinates. The bearing on the intercept shows me the direction the message originated from, and I can see in that rough area the coordinates must start with 18 to 19 or 41 to 42. I spin the wheels until those numbers are in the right spot, and then spin the others until the second part of the coordinates are numeric. I can then see some words start to emerge, correct the other dials, and now I have the decryption key for all the messages for the next day or so. Even when it's not as simple as that, these messages often contain the names of local towns, and there's only so many 2-letter words in the English language, so with that knowledge then manual key discovery is quite possible. You don't have to do this. Instead, you can use your salvage time to target the radio rooms for the key fragments, or just ignore the whole thing entirely. But if you do choose this method, you can use your limited salvage time to focus on ammo, fuel or weapons. It also makes you feel a little bit smart, and who doesn't like to feel a little bit smart sometimes? It's this sort of optional but well-designed and engaging feature that really makes me love HighFleet. It's exactly the kind of game a AAA studio would never bother with. It's difficult to describe, hard to understand, and has a high level of complexity. But it's also an excellent game. It manages to find the right balance between 2 very different genres. It builds a world that feels foreign yet familiar, a world that it fleshes out with tone and light touches of dialogue rather than with cutscenes and reams of text. It gives the player a chance to flex their strategic muscles, while interspersing the cold logistical quandaries with gorgeous fast-paced battles. It's not perfect, and some of the things that make it interesting and compelling can also make it confusing and frustrating. It's certainly not for everyone, but if you are the type of person that likes this sort of game, then I think you will really, really like this game. Hi there, thanks for listening to me talk about HighFleet for the last 20 odd minutes. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, and if you've played this game yourself, how did you get on? Let me know in a comment or in the Discord. And, as usual, if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you back soon.